A small disk brightens out of darkness. At first, the image looks exactly right. A frozen world. A distant world. A finished world. James Webb sharpens the view. Nothing moves. Nothing erupts. Nothing appears unusual. That is where the problem starts. The image remains calm. The explanation does not. The expected stillness is missing. If this is only a frozen leftover world, the questions should be disappearing. Instead, they remain. The image looks quiet, but the conclusion does not. That changes the atmosphere immediately. A dead world is easy to understand. A dead world stops asking for attention. Pluto does the opposite. The farther away it sits, the harder that reaction becomes to ignore. For a few seconds, the view remains unchanged. A bright surface, dark surroundings, no obvious motion, no obvious signal. Just Pluto hanging there. But now the stillness feels different. Not reassuring, suspicious. Human intuition treats distance as death. The farther something is, the easier it becomes to imagine it finished, cold, inactive, settled forever. Yet this image quietly pushes against that shortcut. And if Pluto is not simply frozen, then something inside the story is already wrong. The first picture looked peaceful. Now it looks like the beginning of a mistake. A slow push moves across Pluto's bright, heart-shaped plane. The contrast appears immediately. Bright, frozen plains fill the frame. Darker mountains cut across them. Smoother regions sit beside rougher terrain. The surface does not present one consistent history. It looks like different chapters pressed together. For a moment, the image feels straightforward, a frozen landscape under weak sunlight, far beyond the familiar planets. Then the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Pluto's surface does not age evenly. That is where the earlier suspicion begins to change shape. The surface should remember. Old scars should dominate a world this distant. Cold preserves things. It does not usually erase them. Yet some regions look less ancient than expected, smoother, cleaner, less burdened by age. The contradiction is no longer floating above the world. It is written directly across the terrain. The interpretation does. If Pluto were simply preserved rock and ice, the marks of time should be everywhere. Instead, parts of the landscape look renewed. The surface becomes the evidence against stillness. Now the question is no longer whether Pluto appears unusual. The question is how a world that should preserve its age can keep producing places that seem unwilling to show it. A thin frost map shifts across the surface. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough to suggest a system. Bright regions appear across Pluto. A simple seasonal cycle is laid over the landscape. Ice gathers, ice retreats. Over immense stretches of time, the pattern slowly migrates from one place to another. Suddenly, the picture feels cleaner. Pluto's ices can move with its long seasons. That idea carries real weight. Pluto takes about 248 Earth years to circle the Sun. In a system moving that slowly, change does not need to be violent to leave a mark. It only needs time. For a moment, this works. The bright plains no longer seem completely disconnected from the rest of the terrain. The earlier contradiction starts to organize itself. Instead of random behavior, there appears to be a process. Maybe Pluto is only breathing through ice. Some of Pluto's behavior can make physical sense. And that matters because understanding creates stability. It gives the viewer a way to hold the evidence together. Science often works exactly like this. A pattern appears. A model follows. But there is a condition attached to that comfort. The moving ice explanation only works if the behavior stays slow, limited, and predictable. Now that single assumption has begun carrying almost the entire story. And when one explanation has to support everything, even a small crack can become difficult to ignore. The seasonal model settles over the map. For a few moments, everything appears to line up. Then the fit stops working. Certain terrains refuse to cooperate. The model remains clean. The surface does not. A quiet comparison sharpens the problem. The seasonal overlay sits across Pluto's surface. The terrain remains underneath. One explains part of the picture. The other keeps asking for more. Pluto's cold surface may not be the whole story. That realization arrives slowly. The world remains locked in extreme cryogenic temperatures. Nothing about the landscape looks energetic. Nothing visually demands a deeper answer. Yet the pressure shifts anyway. If sunlight and seasons truly control the behavior, the surface should remain driven from above. Instead, some of the evidence begins pulling attention downward. A clean surface map flickers into a deeper cross-section. The change is brief, but it alters the direction of the investigation. Far beneath the frozen crust, some models point towards something Pluto should not be able to maintain easily. A buried layer of liquid water mixed with ammonia, not an ocean exposed to sunlight, an ocean hidden beneath miles of ice. Ammonia lowers the freezing point. Internal heat slows the loss. Together, they create a possibility that refuses to disappear completely. The surface may not be renewing itself alone. Something below could be helping. Other studies have pointed toward possible cryovolcanic activity. Ice behaving less like rock and more like magma. Material rising upward. Older terrain altered from beneath rather than above. None of this is directly visible in the image. That is what makes it difficult. The bright plains remain on the surface. The evidence points below it. The earlier clarity now looks smaller than it did before. Not wrong, just incomplete. A small world drifts back into darkness. Beyond Neptune, Pluto shrinks again. The surface details fade. The bright plains disappear. The mountains vanish. Eventually it becomes little more than a distant point against black space. Pluto still looks quiet from far away. That part never changed. Other faint objects appear beyond it. Small points scattered through the Kuiper belt. Cold, remote, easy to dismiss. For a moment, simply observe them. They do not move. They do not announce themselves. They sit in silence. Yet that silence no longer means what it meant at the beginning. The first image returns. The same distant world, the same calm appearance, the same frozen face. But now it feels wrong. The image did not change. We did. At the start of this investigation, distance seemed like an answer. The farther a world sits from the sun, the easier it becomes to imagine it finished. A relic, a leftover. Pluto refuses to cooperate with that habit. If distance means death, Pluto should confirm it. Instead, it weakens the assumption itself. That is the real consequence. The problem is no longer one unusual world. The problem is how quickly we classify distant worlds from limited evidence. The dead world was still changing. Now the edge of the solar system feels different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just less trustworthy. And every faint object waiting out there inherits part of that doubt.